You are listening to the Jboy Show, your number one source for Auburn and the SEC.
My goal was to run through his soul and grab his heart when I run through his soul.
Kurt, Nate, Coach Dab. Those are memories.
I think we've established ourselves as, I think, the premier conference in college football.
Now, the SEC is better at the top. It's better in the middle.
The Southeastern Conference remains the premier conference.
Takes the snap. Looking for the receiver. He's got Lutz and Kirkland. Touchdown, Auburn!
Think about it. It's always been the SEC and everybody else trying to catch it.
I think this is probably the best league from a competitive venue standpoint.
Most capable teams. You just look at those programs, the way they recruit, how they invest.
Snap to Burrow. 3 steps. Fires. Back corner of the end zone. Over the shoulder catch. Did he hold on? He did. Justin Jefferson. Touchdown, Tiger.
And now, your host, Jboy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Friday edition of the Jboy Show. Really excited to be joined by a guy. I know you've seen him on TV all the time. Was an unbelievable head coach at Wright State, won the Horizon League Coach of the Year in 2004. He was also an assistant at Ohio State, Boston College, and St. Louis. Right now, he's the ESPN National Recruiting Director for boys high school basketball. You can catch him doing games, too. He does a little bit of everything, and that's Mr. Paul Biancardi. I want to call you Coach, but, I know you haven't done it in a while, but I really appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And, I try to coach myself every day, so you can call me a coach.
There we go. Well, once a coach, always a coach. But yeah, I want to jump right into it. Paul, you're a guy that's been around the game, that understands the game and has kind of seen, and I've had other guests on before, and we've talked about this, just the transition and the style of play in basketball. And before we kind of get into the recruiting side of it and all that stuff, just can you talk about just kind of the way the game has transitioned really in what I call, the LeBron era?
Yeah, well, I actually recruited LeBron James when I was at Ohio State. Yeah, he was a freshman, and I was at Ohio State, and our staff, we would go see him play. We'd bring him up campus. Got to know him a little bit, and then as LeBron got older, entering his junior year, the NBA was calling his name hard. Back then, you could go from high school to pros, and when he started his junior year, that basically ended our recruitment of LeBron James. But it was a fun couple of years. Now I get to watch his son, Bronny.
Yeah, and good.
In regards to your question, I thought he was one of the first guys that came into the game that you could say was positionless.
Yeah.
What was LeBron coming out of high school? You could call him a small forward, then he bulked up and you called him a power forward. And you see his ball handling and his passing is second to none. So some people called him a point forward. So I think that's where the game has evolved in terms of positions. So many people say, what is he? There is a positionless side of basketball today where a lot of guys don't have a true position. Mm-hmm. And I think LeBron started that, and I think the Warriors carried that on when they brought their Steph Curry into the mix, small, slight guard who could really shoot it deep. And then shooting and positionless basketball has been the priority of the NBA game, and now it's filtering down to the college game and to the high school game.
Yeah, and you can see it every time you turn the TV on. So many teams now are running and gunning and shooting the three and Auburn is one of those teams shooting it at a volume that you really haven't seen before. But kind of sticking on an administrative topic, the G League has taken some of the top talent. You look at Jalen Green, obviously, as an example. Do you see the one and done being eliminated and there being some sort of a farm system? I had Jared Weiss on from The Athletic, and he thinks it's going to turn into kind of like the European academy system, but over here.
Well, he's partially right about that. There's going to be some NBA academies around the world, India, China, could be over in somewhere else in Europe. Different places, the NBA is going to put up academies for kids to go, from high school to those academies and then into the NBA. Mm-hmm. I think the G League made a great move by offering Jalen Green a big contract and also Isaiah Todd, Deshaun Nix, and a couple of other guys. And if you think about this, the timing was really good because we don't even know if there's going to be college basketball next year.
Yeah.
What we really don't know is going to be a full slate, half a slate. Are we going to play at all? Is it going to be interrupted? And the same goes for the G League. We don't know that, but those G League guys are going to get paid regardless. So I think this year was a great year to make that transition from high school to the G League. But I like what the G League did is they offered an opportunity to guys that wanted to be trained full-time, have a shot at the NBA, their NBA prospects, maybe guys that didn't want to go to school right after high school. And, it's not for everybody because not everybody's going to be successful. Jalen Green's going to be successful wherever he went, whether it's Europe, G League. He could have sat out and stayed at home with a trainer and still be a top 3 pick in the draft. Could have went to college, and if college game was played, I think that would have helped his brand even more like it did with guys like Zion Williamson.
Yeah.
So I think the G League has done something good for themselves. I think it's given kids an opportunity to take a different path. The NBA's behind it. It's not for everybody. It's going to take 3 to 4 or 5 guys from the college game each year. I don't think it hurts the college game at all. And if you think about this for a minute, this past year of college basketball, I mean, it was really exciting. Remember all the early season upsets, the Stephen F. Austins of the world?
Yeah,
they
Evansville
went
at Kentucky.
Yeah, Evansville at Kentucky. So major upsets. Everybody's like, who are these teams? And all of a sudden in February, the chalk started to step up. Gonzaga, Michigan State, Kentucky, Auburn. Everybody was playing at such a high level. Duke. So what happened was the freshmen in college basketball really weren't talked about all that much. Number 1 player in the country, James Wiseman, played 3 games.
Yeah.
Then he sat out. The NCAA issue, decided not to come back. Cole Anthony got hurt. I think only played in 50% of his games this year. Anthony Edwards for Georgia, he was up and down all season. He had some great games and some games you didn't even know he was in the game. Vernon Carey was probably the most productive freshman of them all. But so my point is we had a great college basketball season, and the freshmen really didn't impact it.
Yeah.
Next year in college basketball, if we play a college basketball season, this freshman class, it is the best I've seen in the last 5 to 7 years. And that's with Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd and some other guys not even being involved. So it won't hurt college basketball all that much. It would be great if Jalen Green did play college basketball, but he chose a different path, and I think it's a good thing for him and some of those other guys.
Definitely, and it'll be very interesting to see, like you said, whether we're playing a full slate or a half a slate. But regardless, it did impact some guys' decisions, and like you said, the G League snuck in at the perfect time. Life's all about timing, and they got a good one because Jalen is very special. But kind of switching gears here, Paul, a little bit. I want to talk a little bit of recruiting, and I want to stick in the SEC. There's a handful of big time guys out there, and you know how it goes. There'll be one pop every 2 weeks. But I want to start off, and I know there's only certain things you can say, but Jonathan Kuminga is a guy that Auburn fans, Texas Tech fans, Kentucky fans, I guess you could say G League / professional fans have really kept their eye on, and everybody, including us, have predicted him to go the professional route. Have you heard anything on that? Is there anything you can say? And what do you think about Jonathan Kuminga as the prospect?
Well, where I think he's going to go, I think there's 3 choices on the board. It's professionally overseas. It's the G League still may be a possibility, but they already allotted Jalen Green their top shelf money. Unless they came up with another top shelf budget, which I think is really hard during Corona virus time with so many properties losing so much money. And I don't think Jonathan Kuminga would take less of a budget line than Jalen Green took. So I'm not sure about the G League and how that's going to work. And don't forget, this isn't a true G League team. This is an affiliate team of the G League.
That is true.
They don't have to have that grind of those small towns and having peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and bananas for a pregame meal.
Riding the bus for 8 hours.
Riding the bus 8 hours, maybe in each direction, and staying in hotels that are not the same as the NBA would stay in. This is an affiliate team that's going to be treated like an NBA team. They have a former NBA head coach working with them. They'll have professional trainers. So they're gonna have more of an opportunity to grow than maybe the regular G League team. But for Kuminga, and then college is in the mix. Texas Tech, his brother is there, and that's what's made them the favorite in many ways. And I think if he goes to college, I think you have to look at Texas Tech as being the favorite, and then the possibility of the international game. Contracts are still probably being discussed. There's probably negotiations going on between Jonathan Kuminga and some professional organizations. And really, truly, he's not in a hurry because nothing is starting right now. There's no reason to commit to a college. There's no reason to commit to a professional team. So I think he's going to probably, in my estimation, and I had him on my podcast a couple of months ago, I think he's going to wait probably until the end, maybe August.
Yeah.
And then just kind of show up at Texas Tech or get on a plane and go, to Australia or somewhere else and take his professional package. I think he's going to wait to see what the best deal is for him. As far as a prospect goes, I mean, he's physically imposing at 6'8" as a wing player. He looks like a tight end, to use your football vernacular. He's 6'8". He's got great hands. He's powerful. He beats you with his athleticism and power by driving to the basket. He punishes you in the paint. Outside shot still needs a lot of work, but it's getting better. He's a hungry offensive player who wants to put up a lot of points. He's got skill, athleticism to do that. I think his basketball IQ, I think his jump shot needs polish, and his defensive intensity needs work. But he's a prospect who is a very good player, and I think over the course of time with some really high-end coaching on the defensive end, I think he could be a terrific two-way player because he's got really good instincts. He's just got to learn more about the game.
Yeah, and again, it's going to be interesting to see that growth because he has all the checks all the physical boxes. That's for sure. But kind of looking at some guys in the class ahead of Jonathan, and there's a few guys that SEC fans are really kind of honing in on, and I'm sure obviously that you've talked about and maybe even had on the podcast. And I know, just speaking from Auburn's perspective, three guys that they're very excited about are Joyful Hawkins, Jabari Smith Jr. and Scoot Henderson. Have you heard anything on the front of those guys? Is Auburn a leader for any of them? Is there anything you can tell us on that front, Paul?
Well, Jabari Smith, I can tell you one thing. I coached against Bruce Pearl when I was in the Horizon League and know him very well. Mm-hmm. He's done a fantastic job in Atlanta, in the state of Georgia, in recruiting. You take a look at Jared Harper, and they've had so many good players over the time. They're in there with Jabari Smith, but I think Jabari Smith right now on my podcast, he said, the schools that were recruiting him the hardest were Georgia Tech and Georgia, the in-state schools. Okay. And something just tells me he's a homebody. Okay. And he may stay at home, but if he was to leave the state of Georgia, I'd put my money on Bruce Pearl. Yeah,
that's one you can never sleep on. And again, I watch his tape, and again, Paul, you've forgotten more about basketball than I know. But I watch his tape and just the athleticism and his ability to do so many things. I mean, is he the top guy in that class, Paul? Who would you put at the top of this 2022 class?
In our ESPN 100, we have Chet Holmgren, number one. 7-footer, only 190 pounds, soaking wet. I mean, he's a freak. And I say that because he's a world-class shot blocker as a 7-footer with a 7'4" wingspan. I mean, he rejects everything at the rim. And then offensively, he plays like a small forward. And he has real skill, real IQ, a dependable jump shot. As a 7-footer, he puts it on the deck. If somebody his size tries to guard him, it's impossible. And if somebody smaller than him tries to guard him, he will go into the paint. Highly skilled, great shot blocker. Number two is Patrick Baldwin Jr.
Yeah.
Best high school, he's the best shooter in the high school game.
Y'all just had him on the show, too.
Yes, we did. I mean, he's going to stay somewhere in the Midwest, or Duke is probably going to get his services if he doesn't stay, at home. Wisconsin, he's from. His dad played at Northwestern. Dad, Pat Baldwin Sr. He's also the head coach of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And
wow,
it's always scary, right, when a kid has his father on his final list of schools. How do you say no to your dad?
I know. I guess you just hope dad's like, son, listen, it's probably best that you go to Duke. But again, I would, as a coach, and I'm sure you too, you don't probably sleep well at night until that name is on that paper regardless, but especially in that situation.
No doubt about it. And you got Kentucky on there, who's produced more pros or as many pros as Duke, Michigan, North Carolina. And then, so that's number 2. Paolo Banchero, young man from the West Coast. He's 6'8", 230. So I just named the top 3 guys: 7-footer, 6'9" shooter, a 6'8" power forward in Paolo. Jaden Hardy, a kid from the West Coast, is a 6'5" combo guard. And there's Jabari Smith sitting at 5, NBA skills, a power forward stretch guy who can shoot threes, but he puts it on the deck really well from the high post. He beats you with footwork and skill, inside, height, athleticism. He's got the whole package as a power forward goes. And this class is so strong at the power forward position. He's the 3rd power forward in this class. I consider Chet Holmgren a power forward, even though he plays close to the basket as a defender. Offensively, he's a face-up guy. Yeah.
And there's a team, too, and again, you talk about, the 2022 class being loaded in power forwards, and there's a team in the SEC that I think is recruiting, obviously at a level they've never recruited at, but, an elite level, and that's Tennessee. Can you talk for a second, Paul, just about what Rick Barnes has done with this class they just signed and who they're in on and just the momentum that the Volunteers have going forward?
Rick Barnes he was doing it long before Tennessee. I mean, he was recruiting and coaching and winning at a high level at Texas. Mm-hmm. And before that, he was at Clemson, I believe, and he did a fantastic job there. I got to meet Rick Barnes when I was coaching at Boston College, and he was the head coach at Providence. I mean, my goodness, his teams were big, strong, they were physical, and they would win. So Rick Barnes has been a winner his whole life. And what he's done at Tennessee is amazing in terms of resurrecting the program through the beginning of 3- and 4-star guys. Grant Williams is a great story.
Yeah.
Grant Williams was not in our top 100, but he was a top 150 player, and nobody had him pegged as a pro. And when he changed his body at Tennessee under Rick Barnes, he became All-SEC Player of the Year, and then he went on to the NBA, and that's because Rick has a big commitment to strength and conditioning, and I think that's where a lot of his guys get better because they play with a physical chippiness to them, and they play with a great length of physical conditioning along with being skilled. And having that success with Grant Williams, I think, attracted other guys. This class here, he brought in 3 top 100 players, and they're not the sexy names on the board, but Keon Johnson, to me, is really sexy in terms of his athleticism.
Yeah, he's a freak.
He's the real deal, but he's a guy who's he's not top 10, top 15 guy, top 20. He's right outside of that. Jaden Springer, we had him in the top 20. Now, he's not flashy, he's not fancy, but he is really effective, and he's efficient, and he's a winner, he's competitive. So you're looking at 2 guards, 6'5". Corey Walker, 6'7", prototypical small forward, power forward. He plays that small ball game. I mean, this class is the most talented class that Rick Barnes has brought into Tennessee.
Yeah, and it's going to be exciting to watch them and on the hardwood. And Tennessee's been a staple really since Rick has got there, kind of the top tier of the SEC. And that brings me to my last question, Paul. And we're talking to Paul Biancardi, the director of high school basketball recruiting, boys basketball recruiting for ESPN, the number 1 guy in college basketball recruiting, in my opinion. And I think the facts speak for themselves. But when you're looking at the SEC, Paul, and like we talked about, you've seen the game and you've seen the game evolve. And just me watching it, from afar, you can really tell about a handful of years ago that the SEC made a commitment in basketball to try and march toward the top. And just look at the coaches around the league. Obviously Bruce Pearl, Nate Oates, John Calipari, the list goes on, Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt. Do you think the SEC is as deep as it's ever been? And do you see them kind of marching? I don't know if they'll ever be as powerful as the ACC is in basketball because of football, but do you see the SEC kind of taking that same path?
I do. And you hit it on the head. You said coaches. When this conference hired John Calipari at Kentucky, it made a statement that they want to be the best conference in college basketball. Remember, Billy Donovan was at Florida at the time, and he was the king of the SEC in many ways. And when John Calipari came in, they butted heads in recruiting and on the court. And I think John Calipari raised the level. He raised the bar of the SEC. And you see that through the hiring of the coaches that they've had. You got Ben Holland at Mississippi State, who went to 3 Final Fours at UCLA. Yeah. Mike White at Florida is a star in the making, in my opinion. I think he's very, very good at what he does. Rick Barnes, a Final Four coach. And part of Rick Barnes' success, we talked about his commitment to the strength and conditioning. He develops talent as well as every coach in the country. So now he's recruiting talent, getting talent, and developing that talent. And that's why they're one of the top teams in the country. Now you got Buzz Williams at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
What he did at Virginia Tech, it's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to go to the Sweet 16 at Virginia Tech. Yeah. It's a hard job in the ACC. And then Frank Martin pulled off the biggest miracle, I think, in modern day history, taking South Carolina to a Final Four.
Hey, I know. When did you ever think, Paul, that Buzz Williams getting hired in the SEC would be kind of an underrated hire?
I know. And that's, you said it though, it's a coach's league now. See, the Big 12 was always a coach's league when it had Tubby Smith and Bill Self and Rick Barnes was at Texas. These are Final Four coaches. I think a lot of these conferences pride themselves on hiring Final Four guys. Well, John Calipari won a national championship and has been to, a couple of Final Fours, and you got Bruce Pearl now at Auburn. I know how good Bruce Pearl is. I went head to head with him at Milwaukee. When he was at Milwaukee, he was beating Boston College. He was beating Alabama. He was beating different schools in postseason play. So this is a coaches' conference. These coaches recruit really well. They do the recruiting by themselves to a large degree of the guys that they really want. Of course, the assistant coach does the bulk of the work, but these are recruiting head coaches, and that's why they're so successful.
Yeah, and again, recruiting is the lifeblood of any program, and something that me and you've done before, so we know how it goes. But Paul, man, I really appreciate you joining us. Unbelievable insight. Got to have you back on, hopefully as we get closer toward this season. Can you tell everybody where to find you? Because you got a podcast that everybody needs to check out if you care at all about basketball recruiting or basketball in general.
Yeah, we started the High School Happenings podcast. You can find it on my Twitter at Paul Biancardi or on Instagram at Paul Biancardi. And I have a website, coachbiancardi.com. So I'm all basketball all the time.
Yes, sir. Well, again, I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we get to talk soon, and be safe out there. And hopefully we kind of get back to normal soon and can get back to sports.
Well, I really enjoyed this podcast and this conversation, and you guys are doing tremendous with this podcast, only a couple of months old.
I appreciate it, Paul. That means the world, man. We'll talk soon and be safe out there.
All right. Thank you.
That was head director of high school basketball recruiting, Paul Biancardi. You can catch him doing analysis on games, just the top guy in the business. So he just gave us unbelievable insight on Jonathan Kuminga. Jabari Smith, if you're a Georgia fan, I would be pretty excited about what I just heard. We're going to get him back on, obviously, talk about Joyful and Scoot and all the top prospects. Chet Holmgren, all those guys as well. So thank you again for joining us. You guys make this thing happen. Remember, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Jboy Show. We're on YouTube at The Jboy Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube page as well. You can text JBOY to 90407, and you will get high-profile predictions before anybody, and you will also be entered in the giveaways that we do. Again, we're brought to you by the Investor Brand Network. If you want to do advertising, we've had a bunch of people hit me up about advertising on the show. Let me know. We have the packages put together and everything. And also, always shout out to Faison in the studio doing work. And shout out to y'all. Y'all are the best. And make sure you keep following us. But that's another edition of the Jboy Show with ESPN's Paul Biancardi. And Jboy is going. Oh yeah, gone.